Spectrum wants to hear your views. You can SMS at any time during the show. Type Spectrum, leave a space, type in your contribution and name, then send it to 7197. Your views, our interviews on Spectrum, Radio 1 FM 90.
A very warm welcome to Spectrum on Radio 1. I'm your host, Edmond Kizito. On Spectrum tonight, a review of the Ugandan economy in 2011. Were we on the right track? The year 2011 began with a projection that the Ugandan economy would continue to grow and that the country would become resilient to the aftershocks of the global financial crunch. By April, the economic situation had begun to look bad. By June, inflation had gone up and traders reported a scarcity of commodities, including food items. The shilling also began to get weaker, and despite the interventions of the central bank using monetary policies, the value of the shilling slumped. The situation improved slightly in October through to December, but as we speak, the exchange rate has gone up slightly to 24.80 to the dollar. Inflation shot to double digits. At one time, it stood at a record 30.4%. In November, it was 29.4%, having eased slightly. Commercial bank lending rates went up, and currently they stand at between 28 and 32%. A grave concern to the business community, who have now petitioned Parliament. An acute shortage of power and fuel also became a major highlight. Load shedding in particular led to protests in several parts of the country, and although more power was expected from Mukitaale by October, the first turbine is yet to be commissioned as we speak. The causes of the economic meltdown, which the government has downplayed, are varied, but many people blame it largely on the cash spent during the February elections and the 1.3 trillion shillings spent on jets, among other issues. Measures were taken by the government to try and improve matters, but the opposition has proposed, and as well as civil society, have also proposed some measures, even though governments say they are working hard on this situation. Civil society and the opposition are saying more hardships are on the way. President Museveni, meanwhile, brushes off these arguments, saying that the economic situation is only a short-term challenge, which gives the people of this country a chance to grow more commodities and export them to the region. So as we prepare for the new year, we reflect on the state of the economy and efforts that need to be taken through the national budget, the National Planning Authority, and at the ministerial level to ensure we have a better economy in 2012. Our guests tonight, Honorable Mukitaale Birahwa, Chairman of the Committee on the National Economy. You're most welcome, Honorable Birahwa.
Thank you so much, Edmond. Good evening, Radio 1 fraternity. Belated Merry Christmas, and we wish you the best of the new year.
Our second guest is Honorable Martin Wandera. He's the Executive Director at the Center for Labor Research and Studies, also a former Workers' MP in the 7th Parliament. He's actually a social and labor economist. You're most welcome, Honorable.
Thank you very much, Edmond. And good evening, listeners, and Happy New Year.
Honorable Wandera, can you give us an overview of the economic performance of this country in 2011?
I think what we have seen in 2011 is an indictment of the neoliberal market policies that for the last 3 decades have been touted by the Bretton Woods institutions like the IMF and the World Bank.
Yes.
Because 2 decades, 3 decades ago, we were told by the IMF, and the Ugandan government gladly embraced these policies, that if you liberalize, you privatize, you adapt a tight and fiscal and monetary policy stance, then you would achieve growth, you would create employment, and the economy would be transformed. This has not happened, and the economic hardships that you see are manifestations of the failures of the policies that have been adopted. I was just reading a paper by Dr. Louis Kasekende, the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Uganda, which he presented at the 65th Congress of the Institute of Public Finance in Cape Town 2 years ago. And in this paper, he says that the neoliberal policies that have been pursued by African countries have failed to develop the private sector into drivers of the economy that can lead to economic transformation. The inflation that you see in this country is because there isn't enough production. To put it very simply,
Yes.
the supply side is constrained. I was just listening to radio as I drove in here, and UBOS has released economic data, I think for this month, and the manufacturing sector grew in November, grew at 7%. In 2010, it had grown. About the same time, it had grown by 15%.
So it was contracted by about half.
But it was contracted by about half. The agricultural sector is also not doing well. Yet 70% of the population is in agriculture, and agriculture, the 70% of the population today accounts for just 15%
Of the economy.
So the issue for me is a structural issue. The inflation that we are seeing is just a manifestation of a bigger problem. The same is true also when it comes to the problems that we've had with foreign exchange. It's because we are not exporting enough. We are importing more than we export. For every shilling that we get from exports, every dollar, we spend $1.7 US on imports. So in such an economic scenario, I don't see, actually for me, the situation will not get better unless there is a shift from the economic model that has been pursued, such that we see more public spending, for example, in agriculture, in manufacturing. You just stated here, interest rates 28 to 30%.
Yes.
Which manufacturing concern will borrow at 28 and 30% and be able to survive?
Right.
I was also looking at an IMF report. Only 12% of the loans in this country have a maturity period of more than a year. Most business loans,
Short-term.
Yeah, they're short-term loans. Countries don't grow that way. If you look at Japan, Korea, and the other East Asian countries, interest rates were very low during their periods of high growth.
Yes.
The maturity period was long. They were long-term loans. That is not the case here. And it's going to be difficult to do that in a situation where the financial sector is private sector owned, but also dominated by foreign actors.
All right.
The banks that you see here are not, their interest in Uganda is not for us to develop, it's for them to make profits.
Right.
So one of the things that has to be done, if we are to develop, we must go back to public sector banking, such that the financial institutions are subordinated to the development goals of the country, such that government is able to apply to use
affirmative action.
Yes, yes, you should be able to direct the financial sector where it goes.
Right.
I was talking to a banker yesterday. They lend to agriculture at 30%.
Yes, which is not.
It can't work. A private bank won't allow that.
Right.
Even the agriculture, many banks are actually reluctant to lend under the agricultural credit facility,
yes,
the ACF, because it competes with their own money. So there is for me it is an issue. We need to change the mode of economic policy that we are applying.
Interesting. This is Spectrum, listeners on Radio 1. Tonight, a review of the Ugandan economy in 2011. Where are we on the right track? Our guests, Honorable Stephen Mukitaale Birahwa, Chairman of the Committee on the National Economy in Parliament, and Honorable Martin Wandera, Executive Director at the Center for Labour Research and Studies. It's a research group. He's a former Workers MP in the 7th Parliament. We've just been hearing from him. Right now, we'll hear from Honorable Birahwa. What's your overview of the economy as this year winds?
Yeah, thank you so much. I want, first of all, thank my Muzukulu Honorable Martin Wandera.
Thank you.
You know, in Unyero, we know that our Bazukulu are somewhere in Usoga. And I want to thank him for articulating the major issues, challenges we have as a country. But let me try to put them in a broader perspective. First of all, we need to agree that the last 3-4 years have been turbulent globally. We did caution as a Committee of National Economy in 2009 that there will be secondary effect of the global financial crisis. And the timing was, for us, somewhere around this year, because we are happy though that our remittances have still remained to be high, but there has been some contraction with some grants, with money related to the civil society and direct foreign investment. We must also be aware what is happening in Europe. The Eurozone is about to collapse. I think the EU is about to collapse. The pigs, as they call them, Portugal, Italy, Spain, and Greece. They are in problems. You heard of Britain going unilateral the other day. Things are not very good at that level. Now, for us as a country, before I bring in the perspective of the role of the state, we've been having quite a steady economic growth for the last 15 years. It is true that the structural adjustment programs of the Bretton Woods, World Bank and IMF did help the country divest and give some leverage to the private sector, but it cannot be given a maximum latitude. It was only up to some stage. And even then, we've been saying many times that even the way it was dispensed, it was important to have even reviewed it much earlier, because now we are talking of 20 years without review. So, as a Committee of National Economy, we closed Parliament with a comprehensive report, not yet adopted, and we're going to discuss that when we resume Parliament, so I don't want to preempt the report we did present. But it is true, by February this year, we had a problem of very high rates of fuel. Remember, globally, the price per barrel shot from close to 80 to 10, about 110.
Almost 110, yes.
And we are importing oil, so we couldn't run out from that. But also remember that there was drought. Because of drought, there was scarcity of food. And that, if you check around that time, one of the biggest drivers of our inflation was, number one was the food
Originally
items.
it was food.
Food items, and then, but as you go on, it becomes compounded with other factors. But this economy has even been more hurt by the energy sector. We've not had steady supply of power to our manufacturers, and this affects employment across the board. It affects so many other people. So we have a very big challenge. Now, what do we need to do at this point in time? Aware of the unpredictable global scenario, we need to have some kind of inward-looking policies. Inward-looking policies, you say, what is our challenge? Our current account is disadvantaged to the effect that we import much and export less. So how do you deal with that? How can you increase your exports? If you have market like we have in Juba, some food can still go in Kenya and DRC. How can you double agriculture production? How can you add the value of agriculture production? So that, and that's what the budget should be doing, so that you can at least gain more in as far as that is concerned. It's true the telecom companies have helped us a lot, because communication is the easiest thing to do now. But we also don't ask ourselves how much profit these people take out. We are interested in getting details of this, because all these are foreign companies. If you have foreign banks, if you have foreign telecom companies, and now we are getting foreign companies, that means that all the profit is going out. So in all this, we need to look at the local content, even as we go into the oil industry. As long as most of the contracts, most of the business is going to be done by foreign companies, that means the foreign exchange is just running out of the
right.
So this is, among other, a lot of other issues. But let me go to the banking sector in particular. It's true that most Ugandans have now been borrowing, salaried people have been borrowing. It's been very easy to find you in your office and the bank says we are giving you a loan. We were comfortable when it was getting to around 15%, 17%. But by the close of the year, banks have slapped close to 30%.
Yes. And
we are saying that is illegal. Because a police officer, a civil servant, a teacher, a nurse has a fixed salary and did negotiate a loan at that point for that rate. Where does she get that extra charge you're slapping on her? And we have engaged Bank of Uganda and we are saying this is not best practice. We would want an instrument reversing this, because the intention of Bank of Uganda, and we must support Bank of Uganda in their good intentions of arresting the inflation.
Yes.
Because the moment you lose the value of a shilling, you lose everything.
Yes.
So whereas we must support them, we cannot allow the sharks to really cheat our people. So ideally, the bank rate introduced by Bank of Uganda today is not intended to affect the previous loan portfolios. It should discourage future borrowing, and therefore banks are being dishonest to charge their customers who had earlier business. Yeah, not only, even businessmen. Right. If you borrowed for some business at 18 and you are now told to pay 30, it's unfortunate. So that's one of our contention in our report, and we hope when we come back the ministry will be able to give us an answer. And I want to agree entirely. We've been saying for many years that we cannot rely on commercial banks. Commercial banks are not here as philanthropists to transform Africa. These are multinationals who are here to make an extra dollar if they can. So it's a responsibility of us in government, it's a responsibility of the political class to take charge of some of these excesses and appetite of the private company.
Right.
And that's why it's important that we should seriously think in terms of revitalizing our Uganda Development Corporation as a government arm to deliver the public-private partnership. If government can find money to invest in strategic sectors, which we think we should, and energy by now we think should be government and not private sector, should get money from UDC, and then we find money for the Uganda Development Bank,
yes,
or anything semblance of UDB, whether it's agriculture, whether it's value addition agro-industry bank, because the mismatch our businesses are suffering and why they have very early mortality is that a long-term project with long gestation, possibly 4 or 5 years to recoup, is borrowing from a commercial bank expected to pay in a year. And that mismatch chokes our nascent institutions. So all these are areas we really need to look into if we are going to arrest the situation.
All right.
But immediately what we would want to see is that more investment in agriculture, in terms of government budget, would want to, productivity must be increased.
All right.
I must even say I think we have too much democracy. We need to see everybody putting some work, even if it means that you every land somewhere is being tilled to produce more. Because currently, if you go in the villages,
we have a lot of idle land.
People are, we have a lot of idle land. Speculators will just get land, keep it there in square miles. But also, we also have a lot of people doing nothing.
Okay.
In the name of democracy, the LOCs cannot help people do this, you know. So there is also productivity is so low.
Right.
People are not working. We can't have people drinking early in the morning and playing matatu. So it's a challenge both on the political side, but generally as communities also need to mobilize our people to be more productive.
All right, Honorable Birahwa, you mentioned the issue of indigenization without using the word. Honorable Martin Wandera mentioned it as well. But one of the things that you say, you know, the telecom companies are foreign owned, the banks are foreign owned, but some people have argued that even as we look at aid has had a minimal impact on the economic growth, maybe 1%. But the real drivers of economy, private radio stations, mobile phones, mobile money, and the internet, four actual points, have not benefited from aid at all. Do we really need to continue looking at aid and the Bretton Woods institution with their demands for liberalization, or should we have a total rethink of some of these policies?
You see, the Baganda have a saying, "Nanyoni mufu ya akwata awawunya." This is our burden. No one will come from outside this country to carry our cross. Again, if you go back in times and look at all countries that have developed, it has been growth and sustained growth and development has been born out of inward-looking policies, as Honorable Mukitaale said, and domestic local initiatives. There is no country in this world that has developed because of
foreign aid.
Yes, there has been external assistance, like if you go to Korea. But what the Koreans did, they emphasized less of foreign direct investment, but more of foreign credit to indigenous farms, such that after retiring the loans, the investment remains Korean. Now here, when we were privatizing, we emphasized a lot of foreign direct investment.
Yes.
Foreign ownership.
Foreign ownership.
That's what it means.
Yes, foreign ownership. And that is not good for the economy, because it affects our current account, in that dollars keep going out, and that undermines domestic capital formation. I was looking at BOU data just this morning, and every year the equivalent of 1% of Uganda's GDP goes out of this country as profits from foreign investment, from FDI. This is the equivalent. Our GDP at current prices is about $17 billion. That's a $170 million
every year.
Just imagine if those investments were locally owned, and you know that money remained here.
Right.
So there is to develop, we'll have to adapt what is called industrial policy, so that we sit, identify sectors that we think will be drivers of our economy,
and then invest in them.
Yes, and government facilitates investment in those.
This is Spectrum on Radio 1. We'll be back. Do stay tuned. You know how to...
John, Mike and I, we go back a bit. We knew John at the beginning, working for someone else. But he was different. He had vision, saw opportunities. He started working towards his goal, opened his own garage, and worked, learning the hard way. His reputation spread. Trust, consistency, quality. Soon people were coming to him from all parts. He made himself and his whole street prosper, and also helped friends, seeing potential in people and helping them on. But John never shouts about all his success. He's just who he is. Special.
So here's to men like John, who make a difference, who enjoy Nile Special, the rich, satisfying taste from the source. Nile Special. You've earned it.
Not for sale to persons under 18.
Let the sunlight in.
Good morning, sunshine of my life. You look happy today.
I am. I came in here and I saw there was a whole pile of washing to do.
But I thought you didn't like doing the washing.
No, I love it. Anything else you need washed?
Sunlight 2-in-1 with added fabric softener. Smells so good, you want to use it again and again.
Let the sunlight in.
Sunlight 2-in-1. Sunlight clean, sunlight fresh.
Sunlight in. Happiness is all around. Let the sunlight in.
Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90 is brought to you by Stanbic Bank.
Welcome back on Spectrum tonight. A review of the Ugandan economy in 2011. Were we on the right track? Our guests tonight, Honorable Stephen Mukitaale Birahwa, Chairman of the Committee on the National Economy, and Honorable Martin Wandera, a social and labor economist, currently Executive Director at the Center for Labor Research and Studies, but before he was work as MP in the 7th Parliament. He'll be able to contribute to this discussion when that time comes. Which are the battles we should be pressing, Honorable Birahwa, to get this economy on track?
Just last month I was in Busan, Korea, which was being showcased as a success story of aid.
In which country?
Busan, Korea.
Yes.
South Korea, which has built indigenous capital, indigenous industries using aid. So the ownership of capital is something very important, and we've been saying this, and it is in our report, and that's why we are talking of all these efforts which can help build some semblance. I want to give an example. Just before we close Parliament, we are discussing the crisis in the cotton sector, and if you look at the value we export, we're actually exporting wealth and jobs in the apparel, in the textile industry. If you look at how much government imports in terms of uniform of army, police, and a lot of government purchases in the industry, schools, we can actually stop importing uniforms and produce them locally. So these are the kind of the inward policies I'm talking. You know, we, in the elementary economics, we call them import substitution and export promotion. That's the kind of thing. So we need to look in this direction if we are going to succeed in helping our people to address some of these problems. Now, what are we saying in Parliament? The budget priorities. I'm happy, even as a party, this was touched in Chankwanza, and I'm sure when we go back, a lot of this emphasis will be put on this, because we need to be putting more time in this useful debate than a lot of other things which are happening. Because if we, like government is now saying we are going to double the agriculture budget, if we are going to sort the power sector, if we are going to, right now, what we are moving at Parliament, and we seem to be already in agreement with the Ministry of Education, skilling Uganda. The problem now of productivity is that if you see the education system vis-a-vis the demography of this country, very young population, one adult, soldering 18 dependents. With UPE, USE may have a problem, and rushing to people are rushing for universities. We need to skill this country. We need to see more business-oriented, more vocational, more technical, more entrepreneurial training. We don't want to hear this. You need how many Ugandans to do what a Kenyan can do. We don't want to hear that kind of another 5 years from now. We want to skill this country. We need to put more money in vocationalizing USE, and in making sure that at least every district has a semblance of a technical school. Now, if we do that, then we are going to have more plumbers, we are going to have more agriculture, soil scientists, we are going to have more business accounting people, we are going to have more ICT people, than just having very many universities coming up but not addressing the challenge. Because if you skill the country, then you can increase productivity. And if you increase productivity, then you can address the supply side challenges. So we cannot discuss this without looking at the human resource. The human resource is a very important component, because even if it is true, agriculture is where most of people are currently, we need the skills also in that industry. But ideally, it's also not very good for us to continue hyping agriculture. We should do agro-industry, we should produce more, we should add value, but with intention of industrializing and having more service-related agriculture industry. If you have more industry and service related, that means you're transforming. If you remain more in agriculture production per se, then you're going to be poor. You are going to go backward, because a sound quantum of development is the way you move transform from agriculture, industry to services. Right. The more population is in the service industry, that means you're progressing.
Right.
But you cannot skip agriculture. You must increase productivity, add value, handle post-harvest losses, get more value, export more, create other related industries and the services with agriculture
industry.
Warehousing, transport, all coming from agriculture, but moving you from the traditional production of agriculture into industry and services. And that's really the way we have to go.
Basically moving from maize for instance to cornflakes and things like that. Because of course agriculture can drive industry as well. Honorable Martin Wandera, let's first of all look at the case study of cotton. It's an agricultural crop. At one time in 1965-66, our crop was at 445,000 bales, which is the peak we've ever had. Right now we have less than 50%. Where did we go wrong?
I'll pick it up from what Honorable Mukitaale has just said. I entirely agree with what he has said, and this is not the first time what he has said, has been spoken here. But the question that we have to ask is, why isn't it happening? Because everyone in the country seems to know that. Now, for me, I think the problem is the issue of the macroeconomic policy that has been adopted in this country. The focus of the Ministry of Finance and Bank of Uganda has been on inflation targeting, bring inflation to below 5%. And when they do that,
they relax.
We have to shift to an economic model where macroeconomic policy, that's monetary and fiscal policy, service the development goals. For example, if central bank is raising the CBR,
yes,
the question that should be asked is, how is this going to facilitate manufacturing?
Yes.
How is this going to facilitate agriculture? Now, today, Bank of Uganda is just concerned about inflation.
Yes.
Their assumption is that if you bring inflation down, you crowd in private investment.
Yes.
In 1998 and 2002, inflation was at 0%. But we did not see the transformation that Honorable Mukitaale is talking about. Number one, therefore, we must see more public spending in sectors like agriculture. Malawi is a case to talk about. It was a food deficient country, but under the agricultural input subsidy program, government increased expenditure in agriculture to 10% of the budget. Today, Kenya, that used to export maize to Malawi, is importing maize. That's number one. Right. That one thing that has to be done. The other one is, which I talked about earlier on, is the question of industrial policy. How do we industrialize?
Yes.
Number one, we must address the question of energy, and the private sector will not help us. Two, capital is an important factor of production. We must make sure that there is easy access to low cost, long-term capital. And the banks that we have will not do it. We must have banks whose objectives are subordinated to the development goals. The broad goal of our NDP is growth, employment, and social transformation.
Yes.
Now, if you look at these interest rates of 30%, do they really service that broader goal? They don't.
Yes.
The other thing that we have to do is to address the issue of capital account regulation, this outflow and inflow. We must choose which money comes into our country. This right now, the moment that we are in this time in history, is one of the most ideal moments to borrow from Europe.
Because the rates are very low.
Very low. But you know, instead of borrowing to finance manufacturing, central bank is borrowing to stabilize the money market.
Yes.
People are running away with their money from Europe because they cannot get more than 4-5%, and they bring it here and we take it in.
At 20%.
20%.
15 plus.
Yes. So if you would rather borrow from the banks there at 1-2%, come and facilitate people who are in production. But for all these things to be done, if you are going to pursue industrial policy, it must come, with a lot of with a judicious mix of incentives and sanctions. Not everyone, should just come and get the low credit from the Uganda Development Bank. It should be pegged to certain production levels, certain export levels, certain level of employment that you create. And if you don't meet the targets, the credit is withdrawn. And this is part of the problem that we witnessed here. Tax breaks were given, holiday, but without any system of sanctions and incentives. And finally, corruption. If we don't address the issue of corruption,
we're fetching water in a basket.
Yeah.
Honorable Birahwa, basically two points that seem to be coming out. We need to move back to SOE, state-owned enterprise, and we need to move back to indigenization.
Yes, I want to emphasize the point I was raising earlier, UDC. Clearly now, you can see that in Europe, it's difficult for them to get any government facility at more than 4%. And if you got, and that would be the kind of money we would be using to finance the UDC. And UDC should not finance just noise making and those who cry most, the TriStar and some few investors who have benefited. We are talking of strategic sector targeting by government. Do you want to intervene in apparels? Do you want energy under PPP? Are you supporting tourism so that we can get more dollars, so that we can diversify the economy via tourism? Strategic sector investment. Find this cheap money, give it to these industries across the board, not a few who are known by Birahwa and that kind of thing. Now, if you do that, then it's the way to go. Now, because the Eurozone is choking, when the governor says, I have a government bond at 15%, they come running.
Right.
So, we thank the governor for that. I don't know whether I should call it prudent or
well, his job is basically to check inflation.
Yeah, because it's I don't want us to blame Bank of Uganda and the governor, because the tool at their hand is the monetary policy.
They address demand.
The fiscal tool is with us, the political class and the executive.
Yes.
The executive controls revenue and expenditure.
Yes.
And the budget. And that pressure should go to them. So what the government is doing at Bank of Uganda is being smart. Prudent may be a different word. Basically, they can attract dollars in a scarce area for this point in time. But that's a drip. A drip is a treatment. It's just to manage, yeah, for some time, some bit of resuscitating. So clearly, we need to intervene into the sectors we badly need, and therefore, this liberalized, over-liberalized forex, too much private sector has done some good.
Yes.
But where they are deficient, government must come in. At that point in time, government don't have this kind of revenue. We are like 70% donor funded. We are now only 24% donor funded. So we are now of age to review a lot of these policies and redirect. We need to redesign the structure of the economy, whereby the state should be able to direct resources where the private sector cannot. without, you see, what the donors are saying there and the multinationals, that is going to be a policy reversal. It's dangerous for Uganda. Well, but there will be a bad investment. I mean, it's coming back. You know, that kind of thing to explain. Is that no, I'm saying that we are saying that government companies can live alongside
private enterprises.
It
happens even in developed economies.
And that's good competition.
Right.
Because in all these countries you hear of, by the way, remember where it comes from. It's government owned.
Yeah.
The Chinese who are now going to give us everything. Most of the success companies are government owned.
Right.
They have government banks for everything, for every sector. And that's a model we should be borrowing from. So I want us to explain that, because if we don't, you know, we have extreme, as he did mention earlier, the neoliberals who are on the extreme side.
Right.
They say either private sector led or government. No, we can have a mix. And the Ugandan position is a mix, and it's possible.
We need to hear from our listeners. Of course, when you talk about targeting this, there was a time when we produced our own matchboxes. Now we import all of them. There was a time when we have electronics made locally.
If you don't mind,
bulbs and tires.
Yeah, it's my grandfather, and I can depart a little bit.
Very briefly before we hear from the listeners.
I personally don't agree that the central bank is being smart with the tools of monetary policy that they have adopted.
Yeah.
Like the bond. Someone borrows money in Brussels, $1 million, an interest of 4 or 5%, comes to Kampala, sends the money to Kampala by wire, and after 91 days he walks away with $150,000.
Yes.
And the 1 million shillings has done nothing to the economy. So where is the $150 we are going to pay in interest going to come from?
Okay.
This is a burden on the taxpayer.
It's a cost.
Yes. The other one is the central bank rate.
Yeah.
I think this was not well thought.
Okay.
Because you choose, when you're trying to target it, to address inflation, you choose your tool based on the causes of inflation.
Okay.
This inflation has been caused, one, by international prices, as Honorable said, supply side constraints, and growth in demand brought about by government expenditure and growth in money supply. But now if you ask yourself, how is the central bank rate going to support relieving the supply side constraints?
Let's hear from the listeners.
It will not.
This is Spectrum on Radio, on our numbers 0414-348-111, 0312-260-390, 0312-261-390. When you call in, please tell us your name and where you are calling from. Spectrum, hello? Hello? Problem with those lines. Spectrum, hello? Honorable Wandera, maybe you can...
Yes, let me just now, if you look at CBR, how will CBR bring down the price of oil? Will CBR facilitate? Because it has, its manifestation, has resulted into an increase in the cost of borrowing. So does that help industry?
It doesn't affect supply.
It doesn't. Now the question remains whether even we should be targeting
inflation,
demand.
Yes.
You see, the supply. But
if you don't target demand, your shilling is not collapse.
No. But if you don't target, first of all, demand is good for supply, because the production is influenced by future expectations about demand.
Yes.
And you know, if you try to send a signal to the producers like manufacturing that you are going to bring down demand, that can have a negative effect. But most importantly, CBR lacks the capacity to bring down demand, because one, only 30%, the bank assets account for just about 30% of GDP.
Yes.
The financial sector is not broad and deep in this country. Most of the money is under people's pillows. So if you raise interest rates, you will not be able to suck that money out of...
I want that to come in.
But also, just to conclude, it has been noted that there is a very low interest elasticity of demand for credit in this country.
Yes.
You raise interest rate, people continue. Yes.
They still borrow.
Because these guys borrow from the shark market at 120%. And Dr. Mugume, Director of Research, in a March 2011 paper titled Monetary Policy Mechanism in Uganda, agreed. He concludes that interest rates as a transmission mechanism is ineffective. I'm therefore very surprised that, he continues pushing for this.
It's good Honorable has raised this point, but I wanted to alert the country that this country is now having bullions, speculators, who have money in their residences. I'm not referring to the NFA type, which was picked by some girl. Yes. But these guys can go and buy dollars and choke the market. So, what Bank of Uganda has done in the recent 3 months, dropping the rate from $2 rate from 2,980 to 2,400. A lot of these guys are crying.
He's burned their fingers.
Like they have really burned their fingers. So there is that class. But the point I was making earlier is that I was trying to segregate at a micro level the role of Bank of Uganda and the Ministry of Finance, separating Bank of Uganda from the political class.
Yes.
When Bank of Uganda is overstretched by the political class, by our spending habits, they are overstretched and they have at times to administer what they shouldn't be administering. Because short of that, the shilling would be no more. And that's why I'm saying, us as a political class, the Ministry of Finance, the experts in finance, should also play their part. Because I'm even lacking the right word. It's not being shrewd, it's not being prudent, it's not being smart. But Bank of Uganda has to protect the shilling. That's their primary cardinal responsibility.
Major job to foster price stability.
Whatever you are disciplining budget, whatever supplementaries, whatever you touch reserves, but for them, they have to a fallback position. I'm trying to understand why Bank of Uganda is doing what they are doing. It's not necessarily the correct thing. Because I know, for example, it has a
macroeconomic stability.
Yes. Now, in the old economics, the old debate was whether to control inflation or to increase employment. You know that old debate.
Yes.
Because every time you're trying to reduce money supply, you are denying the business
opportunities,
productivity, capital, investment. So that's a very old debate, which every economist should always revisit. But it's also true that whereas this bank rate has been applied, borrowing has not reduced.
Well, it has reduced a little bit, but not
it's not proportionate to the application of the CBR. So all these are areas we need to look at carefully. But for me, the emphasis should be on the budget discipline. It should start from where is government putting priority. And we are saying agriculture is the area. We are saying we should do more in energy as we had started. We are saying we should industrialize. We are saying skilling Uganda, and I want to emphasize skilling Uganda. We should put more money in business, vocational, entrepreneurial, agro-related business, ICT, so that we have more people who are going to be producers, who are going to help this country move into industrialization, who are going to move from agriculture to industry, who are going to add value, and we do more services, and then we can see this country moving on.
Maybe let me just say one thing.
Yes.
An analysis of the growth patterns of Korea, Brazil, during their high growth and development period shows that high growth can sit together with the high inflation. Yeah. Korea never targeted inflation. What they targeted was to increase production. And there are also other tools of monetary policy that you can apply without hurting the economy. I agree with my grandfather on Mukitaale that we must protect the value of the shilling.
Yes.
But you could go for a managed managed float or an adjustable peg. And Dr. Louis Kasekende in this paper that I talk about, yes, he was then chief economist at the African, at the FDB, proposes that we should have a managed float. You can consider a managed float or an adjustable peg, saying that you have a floor and a ceiling within which then you are able to check speculators, because they know anytime you can adjust it. Now, because the neoliberal song has been sung so much, when you talk this, people think you are talking communist economy, you are backward, but China, which apparently is the only one of the few economies that are surviving this current economic crisis, is running an adjustable peg. The exchange rate is fixed, and they fix it in accordance with the level of export that they would like to achieve. So this is something that central bank can consider, because it will not come with any cost.
Fixing an exchange rate.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's why we must support the Bank of Uganda to have as much reserve as possible, because the more months they have, the more latitude and leverage they have to play about. But if they are constrained, that means they can also not do much. Again, it goes back to the discipline of
the government discipline. Of course, part of the reserves were taken out to buy jets. We don't know what the jets are doing. Maybe they are protecting this country, seated somewhere. The arguments have been advanced that security is important. 2 points seem to come through. State-owned enterprises need to come back, and indigenization. The government needs to proactively promote locally owned enterprises. Do you see a government will to undertake those two?
I don't see that, because even when in that paper, when Dr. Kasekende said all this, he's from at the beginning in the paper, he says he's a neoliberal at heart. Now it is very difficult, even when they see, it's very difficult for them to change, because they think they are going against a philosophy that they believe in. But that is the way. It's going to be difficult. Even when you listen to Mr. Keith Muhakanizi, you see that.
The finance ministry.
But if we don't change the model of economic policy that we're applying, I don't see us going anywhere. Then two, corruption. Because if you are talking of state-owned enterprises, you need an effective, well-motivated and incorruptible civil service, which we do not have.
Corruption also means that there is a lack of supplies. There is something is insufficient. There is something wrong on the supply side. But I need to ideologically root my final statement that I have no problem if government initially initiated strategic sector investment, whether it is in nucleus industries, whether it is in what sector, and government has initially the majority shares, but later lists its shares to local management and to local capital. That's how we can build local capital. Because the other level of the World Bank has not worked. We have handed over the strategic sector to foreign companies. Now, what we need to do under the UDC, and that's why I was thinking, even the oil industry and even recent sales of Kinyara, that governments should have listed shares to the local managers under management buyout, and then also list to emerging nascent local private sector, because we should not so much help government finally owning. It should be an interim measure for government to nurture our local managers and our local private sector, and that's how we shall own the economy.
Thank you very much, dear guest. Honorable Stephen Mukitaale Birahwa, Chairman of the Committee on the National Economy. Thank you for coming to Spectrum. Honorable Martin Wandera, Executive Director at the Center for Labour Research and Studies. He's a former workers MP in the 7th Parliament and a social and labour economist. We hope to have you more often in this coming year. Thank you very much for tuning in. I've been your host, Edmond. Spectrum will be back tomorrow.
Thank you.
For all your insurance covers, Statewide Insurance Company Limited.